as a game designer in general too, right? And to just kind of kick us off, who are you?
Who is this guy? So I'm pretty much just I suppose a lot of my background getting into games parallels many other designers that do these types of podcasts and interviews. So I'm happy to say that I come from a background of gaming. So when I was growing up, it was video games and D&D all the way, D&D first and then into video games. And then over just kind of life departed me away from it. I got into music and did that full time and traveled and toured and did that whole lifestyle for almost 20 years. And then revisited with my production company, getting into shooting music videos and all of that. And I always knew that I wanted to have an interactive division to my production company. So I went directly head on into game design, got my Unity certification years ago and was going to do a video game. And then one thing led to another. I was making a digital board game anyway. So I decided to just put it to a table and run it through the Kickstarter system, and then hopefully we can get this thing to market and start to grow. We have very modest visions for how we get in, but we have big dreams and goals for where it can go.
Wow, that's quite a journey you had there. Like music, and then like we're going to video games, and then now we're here with tabletop.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. How, I don't know, from all of this, like how did you kind of bring in everything else that you were doing into, designing this game and kind of taking this game to market?
Well, it was pretty intuitive because being creative and being a writer, if you're writing lyrics to a song or writing notes and melodies to a song, or if you're writing a screenplay for a film, or if you're even just jotting down concepts for a music video, all of it is storytelling. And that has always been my number one passion and my number one drive in life in general, is to just engage in as much creative endeavors that I can that tell stories. And video games and tabletop RPGs completely satisfied that for me when I wasn't able to actually generate content myself way back in the day. So it kind of, I knew it was something I wanted to do, but I didn't really know when I was younger how to like get into all of these things. And I thought it was kind of like a jack of all trade is bad. Nobody wants to work with somebody that's good at a bunch of things, right? It's like, but it turned out that ultimately, whether I like it or not, that's what makes me happy, is to sort of create in as many different mediums as I can. And that just immediately just made sense getting into game design, whether it was going to be a video game or it was going to be a board game. Especially now with the direction of some of just a few of the games in my collection and behind me now, the Mansions of Madness, for example. I mean, what would that game even be without storytelling, right? That's kind of how it all connected.
Wow, I love it. That creativity that you can infuse into your project, and also kind of being that jack of all trades, from taking everything in your past and kind of putting it together into this one amazing creation.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And there's room for music in there. There's room for, obviously I do all of the artwork and the paintings in the game. If it's not equipment paintings and things like that I did myself. I was working with an amazing artist, Pavel Lexin. He's a Russian artist that I work with for the game. So I'm either painting and the scoring for the music that I did for all the trailers. So it was cool. You just get to just mix all of the talents you kind of cultivate over the years into one thing. It's always great.
Yeah. So let's talk about the game, right? Tell us about the Runelords, the board game that we're talking about today, and also kind of the world that it's set in.
Yeah, so it is based in the world, not based on the books. It's based in the world of the best-selling fantasy series called The Runelords by David Farland. That series came out in the 90s, and I had read book 1 when I was in high school. And I remember thinking, with my D&D hat on, how awesome that magic system would be, to be able to take endowments from your followers, and somebody can give them to you, their strength, and then you can go and defend the land. It's kind of like a really powerful metaphor for just the military in general, right? Like, you give unto yourself to protect the lands and stuff. So I was like, well, this is really cool. And then I kind of shelved it. Didn't really think much of it until much later in life, and I started going, well, I could make a game based on an IP, so let me start digging around. I'm a huge Shadowrun fan. I'm a huge There's just tons of IPs that I would have loved to. But it just so happened serendipitously, my entertainment attorney for music happened to be the attorney for David Farland, the author, and it just connected. He was just like, oh, you're looking for an IP? Yeah, duh. Here, Dave.
Small world.
It's crazy how that happens. Yeah, it's wild. And then, yeah, one thing led to another. Started some dialogue with David, and he's one of the easiest down-to-earth individuals to start a conversation with. So he wasn't closed-minded to pretty much anything, really. He was open to, it was kind of a clean slate with him. And yeah, and then I just kind of said to him, hey, look, let's not jump all the way in. Let's not commit to the characters of the books. Let's just set this in your world. Let's explore some of the locations and the monsters, and let's dig into the magic system and how it can be incorporated. And then when the game gets a name for itself and it gets out there, we can start expanding into the books. And that's kind of been the game plan since Jump Street.
Wow, that's incredible that, you know, there was so much kind of leeway that you could have just building all of this into the game too. Was it kind of hard to bring those characters and those ideas to life? Just having grown up with it, reading all these things, kind of immersed into the world. What was it like for you just to see it physically come to life in this way?
Well, I gotta say, the co-designer in the game and myself, Sean Engel, he is, I say this in everything that I talk about with these things, but it's very true. He could have 100% been an esports professional. He is a very, very, very high level video gamer. And the way that he sort of like, and it's from Diablo also into first person shooters, things like that. So his understanding of how skill trees should evolve and the best ways to do a build for a particular hero type, or just understanding when something needs to be nerfed, for example, and when the community is in an uproar about something and whether it's legit or people are just bad at the game. He had a good understanding of just kind of how that stuff worked. And since I was coming from a very creative side and he was coming from a math crunchy side, it all kind of like, again, serendipity, right? It was like, it was the perfect balance in game design to come to the table and develop a game based on a magic system like this, because the magic system of the runes being, I'm going to take an endowment, it's going to make me X better in X thing, right? Or in Y thing, it's going to make me X better. So it just lended so well to that way of thinking, and it kind of developed pretty quickly. So Sean and I got our head around exactly what it would be like to be a Runelord on the battlefield, and we knew right away that this could be any type of game. We could have done a world builder, we could have done, and we messed with a lot of ideas, but letting players experience how crazy it is to be a Runelord in battle, level up during play, and become godlike almost from beginning to end, was the experience we decided to go with, and that's what we stuck with pretty early on.
Yeah, it seemed like a really smooth kind of development and growth for the game itself. What you're saying,
for sure.
Mm-hmm. Were there any kind of challenges that you faced from maybe even just like using an existing IP, and kind of building on that, or just in general building up this campaign? Were there any challenges you had to overcome?
Sure. One of the biggest challenges was working with an IP that this is just from my own experiences, right, is that they're going to be unique to where the IP is in pop culture. So if I'm doing Star Wars, right, and then you got to look at where Star Wars is, and you got to understand that you have hundreds of millions of fans that are going to be tearing apart where, when, and why you're implementing what you're implementing into that IP. When you're dealing with something like the Runelords, which was a bestseller, there was a time where David Farland was doing book signings that were just wrapping around the building and around the blocks, and it's kind of like this. There was a time where David was really like just killing the game, and so there was a diehard fan base there of 11 million readership, right? So this at one point was a big IP.
Wow.
And pop culture, just what have you done for me lately, is kind of the thing with pop culture, and it hasn't really been on the surface of people's minds for over a decade, the last book, right? So, and the final book still hasn't come out. So when you ask about the challenges of this particular IP, I would say that it was getting our bearings around what exactly what impact the following could actually have on this as a game. Are we reintroducing old fans to a game and they're going to back it because they love the books? Is that what's going to happen? Or are we going to introduce a whole new fan base to the books because of the game? And if that's the way it's going to go, you have to change your marketing strategy entirely. You have to pretend no one knows about the Runelords if you do it that way, right? So the challenge was definitely, first off, what is this IP and what's its value? Because we knew creatively the value was through the roof. Perfect magic system for a game. That was not in question. But what do we do with this IP, and how do we make it something that is impactful for sales? And that was a challenge, figuring it out.
So that kind of touches on something that you and I were just talking about a little earlier too, like how to kind of market this thing, right? There was already a campaign that just before this, right? And you learned a lot of things to build into the current campaign that is live right now. What kind of learnings do you have, kind of jumping off that IP conversation we just had, like what kind of market or target did you end up choosing? And also, how did you build up to this current campaign?
So I feel like every game, whether a publisher wants to admit it or not, is going to go through an identity crisis phase. Some are much shorter than others. Some, if you're just doing a quick, like my game is 20 minutes and you're popping balloons, right? It's just a party game. Your identity crisis is going to literally end with graphic design. It's going to be like, that's going to be your identity because what is it? How colorful is it? That kind of thing. But if you're diving into some of these more deeper aspects and these deeper genres, you really have to know what the identity of your game is, because no matter how hard you try, the optics and the perception of your game is going to be perceived as, oh, this is nothing new. That's just one example. When in reality, it's just the same genre. So how do you know, like, you can say that about any genre that exists anywhere. You go, well, what's different about putting guys on a battlefield and rolling dice? It's just Warhammer, right? You could say that about literally any game that is a war game. And if the optics of the game is showing you nothing more than just putting dudes on the battlefield and the dice, then of course that's what people's optics are going to be. That's right. So your identity has to be like, okay, I already know that I'm this genre, but now what's unique about my game? And how do you let people go like, oh, okay, so this is something special in that genre as opposed to just a run-of-the-mill in that genre. So that was the first primary thing. And then the second part of that equation is then the optics of how complex the game looks. Because if you start diving into all of the unique aspects of the game, then you're introducing too many mechanics to a new viewer. You're introducing too many components to a new viewer. If you try and show that your game plays 4 players and every demo online shows 4 players, it makes the game look more complicated than it is. So you have to reel that in. And so it's 2 learning curves all at once that you have to figure out and you have to balance. And that was what the first campaign really did for us. The first campaign was like, okay, it's a unique genre. It's a unique skirmish game that's driven by cards, right? But then we tried shoving down everyone's throat, like, but it also does this, and it's got a deck builder, and look, there's multiple game modes, and look, right? And I still stand by the value of all of that, but it's terrible for initial optics. So marketing this, that's something we learned big time with the first campaign.
Got it. So with that said, that kind of that 2-pronged kind of complexity with building this world and kind of launching this existing IP to people, what have you done to really, really hone down your community and launch this, campaign? Like you have a lot funded now. You're like over almost $30,000 funded, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
like,
yes.
How did this all happen? How did it all come about?
So it really is kind of like, you can bring a horse to water, right? There's a million sayings that are this kind of thing. So there really is a certain line where you have to just cultivate the soil the best you can, and then you've got to give it room to grow. And unfortunately, that was the line that we had no choice in the matter when it came to the IP and marketing the IP. We had to put it out there and give room for the books, and all of our ad spends was like, some was going hyper-focused to board games, but then others ad spending and like some of the profiles we were aiming at were fantasy books, and that's something that a normal board game, other board games don't have to worry about. But we just had to like send as much out there as we can to sort of bring awareness to that fan base, that audience. And you kind of got to hope that it's organic. You got to hope that fans of the books are going to respond to the way the game looks, to what their perception of the IP is. And then secondly, you have to just hope that it's reaching the audience.
Yeah.
And you really only can do that by setting up a few months ahead of time. We had 3 months advance to this campaign where we were just running test after test after test. We're putting in $10 into this ad, $30 into this ad. Oh, this one's responding well. Drop 100 into this ad. And we were really like changing artwork around and one little subtle difference to see if it made a difference. And then 3 months of this testing, and then at some point you got to just you got to go, right? We could have got another 3 months testing ads before we launched the campaign, but I don't know that information would have changed much.
Yeah. I love it. You were like learning as much as you can about your audience particular to this game, from the board game community and also from kind of the classic community that already loved the IP that you were building off of. We talked a lot about kind of the challenges there. Let's talk about the flip side of it, right? Like, what part of the game are you kind of most proud of? And also the second follow-up question to that would be, what is kind of the nicest thing someone said about the game as they were playtesting, kind of experiencing it, going back into the world?
Well, the replayability aspect of the game is, and the value. What we give backers, even when it goes to retail, right? Like anybody that buys this game, I think the thing that we are the most proud of is that we didn't trim all of the fat off of this game simply because we thought less is more. We trimmed the fat off of the optics of the game because we thought less is more. We don't want to overwhelm people. But we refused to ignore the voice and the thing that people say all the time about a game. Oh, this game is beautiful, and then I've only played it once. It's like, oh, it's on my shelf, and now it's going to go up on eBay because I just didn't really like it, or it was okay 1 or 2 playthroughs, but now what do I do with these factions? I played them all. I understand them. Maybe an expansion might get me fired up, but that still is nothing for the original components. So it's like there's that aspect. So what we're the most proud of is that when you get this game and it's on your shelf, if you are in this genre, to be very clear, like if you're a Settlers of Catan fanatic, or if you're just into Dominion or card games, obviously this isn't going to be something that's going to hit your table all the time. But if this is if you're a skirmish fan and you're looking for a game to add to your gaming rotation every single month, maybe one Saturday a month you want to play the Runelords, we are really confident that we're giving replayability that's going to last on and on and on. So that's something that we're the most proud of. With multiple game modes, solo and co-op. That's legit solo co-op. So content. The nicest thing that anybody's probably said, I would say that it's how easy. I don't want to say the whole like easy to learn, hard to master. That's like the most cliche thing. Even though we did get a couple of those quotes from people. I think it's just the depth of the CCG aspect of the game and how easy it is actually to learn. That's the nicest thing that somebody can say about our game is just take all preconceptions of everything, just try the game and see if you like it. By the first activation, you're up and running. You know exactly how to play the game, and it's easier than it looks by a mile stretch. So that's the nicest thing that people have said about the game.
That's awesome. And for people who are new to this, what does CCG mean?
So collectible card games, so like Magic the Gathering, things like that, Hearthstone. This entire game runs on that type of meta. The way we're going to be introducing Runelords in the future, they all come out with their own factions, their own cards. So with any card game at all, ever, and I was a massive Magic the Gathering player, some of my friends Pro Tour players, and the conception of that game is the optics are tough. You know, you go up to somebody that's never played a CCG before, and you see somebody just playing Magic the Gathering, and you're like, they're tapping lands and reading cards, and it's like every card has their own. It's like, oh my God, this is overwhelming. But if you just take it one card at a time, the next time you draw that card, you know what it does. You know, people's retention is way higher than I think they give themselves credit for. So that's the CCG aspect of the game, is the cards.
Got it. Yeah. And you mentioned that there's other things that you're planning on the back end too, right? Like building up this world, adding more things to it, right? What's the kind of grand plan for this? Because it's a huge world with a lot of different, yeah, like you were saying earlier, like different monsters, different things you can add into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say legacy play was actually something we have fully designed. It's in-house already. Remember, this game has been under development for over 4 years now in its total. So we're paying the dues and putting in the hours for sure. And the legacy aspect of the game, which is where each Runelord would have their own storyline and it would unfold. And that's what we use the optional deck builder for, which is another CCG type of element to the game, where you use a deck builder to build your army before you go into combat. That's optional. But we utilize that system with those markets, and we utilize the journey deck of events and stuff in that deck builder to tell the story of these characters. And then when you come across an encounter, you actually set up, you just do a quick 2 or 3, 4 component setup, fight a skirmish battle, go back to the storyline and continue, right? So, and that's something that's fully designed in-house. Vera's demo was completely already ready to go for the first campaign, but it was just too much content for people to ingest. So we backed off on Legacy for this. It also saved us the ability on a lot of components, so we were able to bring the price down quite a bit from that. So we went from a $70 game down to a $49 core pledge. So there was a lot of things that kind of benefited from taking out a lot of that content. But when you talk about the scope of where this game can go, legacy play has always been a very integral part of where we want to be. Also, the way it expands is new Runelords. So if you have a Runelord now that you're playing, let's say you back the game and you get these 4 core Runelords, let's say. 2 years down the road, you haven't played Craven in forever. He was cool when you first got him, but you didn't really like the way he played very much, but he was okay. You played him twice, collecting dust. We introduce a Runelord in 2 years from now where some of the cards in that army would be bonkers in Craven's deck, right? So dust off Craven and put him back in the deck builder. Now you have something that is unique and new, and you get to synergize with your old investment. So it's kind of like it's a really big piece of the scope. And of course, adventures and solo scenarios and all that stuff that expands both through the community online and also through official components and expansions. So,
wow. So there's definitely a lot going to be going on in the near future that's going to be built up on top of what you currently have too.
Yes. At least that's the scope. That's the goal, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So from here, like, you probably have a lot of goals yourself as a game designer and someone who's bringing this IP to market, right? What kind of, I guess, lofty design goals do you have for yourself, and like, where do you see yourself going to?
I think that's sort of a to answer that, I would say I came out of the gate. I didn't enter into the game design space intentionally limiting myself just so that I can get my bearings, right? I didn't go in and say I'm going to design a quick, roll the dice, move the pieces. I'm not going to do that type of game just because I want to teach myself Kickstarter and teach myself that. I just said, nope, I'm going to make a game that I'm interested in. I'm going to make a game that I'm passionate about. And because the passion is what's going to get me through all of this. If I was designing a game that I thought was less than lackluster and I was just trying to do it to learn, I would have quit a long time ago. But because it's something that was always my end goal as a designer, it gave me the fuel that I needed the whole time. So I jumped in at the deep end of the pool, and I'm just not giving up, right? So when you talk about aspirations as a designer, it's just lateral for me. Maybe the next game will be something much easier, but it's not going to be because of necessity. It's going to be because that's what I want to make, right?
Yeah. And you mentioned that you want to design something that you're interested in, and you want to design something that you want to kind of like go all in on, right? So from all the games you play and the things that you're like working on designing, how do you usually gauge if something's fun?
Oh, fun. And when you're in it, right? When you're like in it, it's hard to see when something is fun. And I just try and remind myself that at the time that this thing, whatever this ambiguous element of the game that you're maybe asking about, when it was it implemented for the right reasons? Because sometimes if you implement it because another aspect of the game is weak and you're trying to implement something to counteract that something is not working, then you don't know if what you're making is because if you're implementing is because it's what's best for the game and it's an aspect of being fun, or if it's a Band-Aid. And Band-Aids, you don't want to end up with a bunch of Band-Aids on your game. That's bad, right? So I look at something as if it was something that like knocked me out of my seat, like me and Sean are talking about an idea and like you put the phone down because you don't want to scream in the other person's ear because it's such a good idea, right? If it's something like that, then you know it's worth remembering that feeling and being like, okay, is there a way to, even if it's not working, is there a way to keep it because it felt so good when you thought of it? Then it's worth fighting for, I think. But man, Band-Aids, they feel good in the moment, but
yeah. I think this also kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier too, how like some parts of the game were like really complex and you kind of stripped it back, right? Just to make it simple in a way that it was something that was digestible to people, right? Because you could just add a lot to games and make it complex and then make it all these things. But at the end of the day, like maybe it's just like you were saying, just a Band-Aid.
Yeah, and I would say one of the biggest things that we try and do this anyway, Sean and I, when we talk about game design, we try and set ourselves up before we go into this rabbit hole of like any other fellow game designers watching this that has, you know, a co-designer can relate to this. You call and you go, hey, there's something not quite working about this movement thing. This one particular recruit, like, you know, I think the game's broken if we let him do this and this, right? It's very specific. Fast forward an hour and a half later, and somehow in your conversation, like, it's a worker placement game all of a sudden. And you're like, what? Wait a minute, what happened? Like, how did we get here? Like, I just wanted to fix this problem with this recruit. How did we end up changing the game? So that we avoided some of those early design conversations that end up that way, we really try and have a conversation right up front and say, all right, what's the mission statement here for this conversation? And that's what we did when we revisited the Kickstarter campaign. We said, all right, we don't want to change this game. This is the game we love. This is the game we've been working on. And anyone that doesn't actually like the game specifically, then this game's not for them. We don't listen to those voices. But those voices that are saying we love the game, but we got to listen to those. We have to. Because they want what's best for the same thing that we want. Everyone wants what's best for the thing we're making. So we let those voices in. So what we did was we said, all right, we have this amazing voiceover for our previous trailer. You know, we invested in a really great voiceover talent that has done famous commercials and all this. We wanted to do it right. So we got this David Petit, which is an amazing guy. And we had a script that I worked on over and over and over and fine-tuned it. And then I said, all right, here's the deal. Here's our mission statement. Anything that changes in our game to where this script no longer works for our game, we can't make the change. Because if I went over 6 months fine-tuning a script down to the tiniest little details, that must be what our game is at its heart. It must be. So if anything we change goes against that script, then we're making a different game. So that was something we did to make sure we stayed on track with these changes.
Yeah. I think you really bring a good point there of like creating kind of core objectives of what you want your game to do, right? Because not only are you looking to kind of really stay true to IP, but you also want to be able to build a game that makes sense for the world that you're in and also what the people who are looking forward to it want to see too. And another thing that you brought up that I thought was really, really great was also kind of the difference between criticism and also constructive criticism, right? You mentioned listening to people who said, I like the game, but there's also this that could probably make it better. Those people are offering that constructive criticism to like really, you know, help the game excel, just like what you are looking to do too. What kind of tension is there between that? Because, you know, with everything that comes out, there's lovers and there's haters, right? There's always going to be haters out there. Like, how is it kind of dealing with that and kind of going through the process and kind of maybe tuning those criticisms out and also focusing on the constructive criticisms?
100%. I would say, and this is a really important topic that I love when people talk about this particular topic, which is feedback and taking it in and digesting it and then knowing it. It's The number one thing is to know the motivation. If you can understand and get behind the motivation of the critique, then you can know if it's something you have to worry about. If the critique is coming from somewhere so far left field that no matter what you did, you're never going to win that person over, or you're never going to reel that idea in, then ignore it. You have to block it out. You have to. Another piece of feedback that can come in is whether or not it's obligatory. Because obligatory criticism is really dangerous, because that can actually ruin potential people's opinions about a game, and the person that's giving the obligatory statement doesn't realize the damage that that can cause on the hard work that the publisher is putting into the game. I'll give you a good example of that. If you say a general statement about someone's game like, this game is too involved. If you say something like that, that is a very obligatory, quick, reactionary statement that you can make about something. But if somebody only has a couple of seconds to learn about your game, and the person they're listening to, they respect their opinion, the second you say something that's general and obligatory like that, too involved for some people could literally they would immediately write the game off. When in reality, it's not too involved. Maybe it is, but maybe it's not too involved. But you as a designer have to understand that that obligatory statement of it's too involved without any reasoning behind it isn't something that you should immediately be up in arms and change your game about. Don't freak out about something like that, because you know the person was just saying it because they wanted to say something. They had to fill space. Maybe they're reviewing the game. Maybe they're having a conversation with a friend. It's just bleh. Because if you ask that person, why is it too involved, they very likely will riddle off 15 reasons it's too involved, and then you could riddle off 15 examples of other games that they like that do the same thing. It's just obligatory. So motivations, right? That's the motivation behind it. The ones you got to really listen to are the ones that say something along the lines of why can you trigger your own, why do traps trigger against your own guys? That makes no sense. Why should your own recruits be able to trigger your own traps? That's stupid, okay? Even if they say that's stupid, that's really stupid, and they say something mean, that's the kind of comment you go like, oh, wait a minute, hold up. This guy is clearly coming from a position of he's envisioned himself playing the game. He's put himself in a position where he's played other games and didn't like that aspect of it. And now he's saying something here about your game that you really need to take into consideration. Doesn't matter how he delivered it. He could have used the F-bomb. Doesn't matter how he delivered it. That's important criticism. So, and his motivation is coming from a good place. Like, he genuinely feels that wouldn't be fun. So maybe you need to address it. Yeah, if somebody's going to take the time to do constructive criticism, they deserve the time to make sure that it's something that works or doesn't work for your game.
Yeah, I really love those examples that you went through just now about, again, that difference between just criticism in general and constructive criticism that you as a designer and other people as designers too can take into account and either, change a mechanic or explain something in more detail, in more depth. Maybe in that example that you provided, maybe that additional, explanation about why the power would, trigger a trap for your own self. Like maybe that additional explanation just gets someone to just click.
Yes. Yeah, agreed. Yep.
Yeah. So with this said, I'm sure there's been a lot of learnings so far, as you've already covered, a ton of learnings in
always learning
all this development and all this Kickstarter ring, right? What kind of things that have you learned that would be, you think, valuable to kind of impart on other people, to people who are game designers, also people who are potential backers of Kickstarter games too?
Mm-hmm. I think that the biggest thing to take away is because you brought up backer in specific, right? Because there's consumers that don't really care about Kickstarter. There's consumers that do both Kickstarter and buy stuff at the local store and things like that. And then there's just the elite Kickstarter, boom, only, right? Be ready for the culture itself, because it's really hard to plan for the Kickstarter culture because it changes pretty regularly, especially the kind of the undertones of what's good and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And there's a lot of, I got to word this properly because I don't want this to come across as disdainful. But There is some unethical aspects of implementing your game into Kickstarter that you have to come to terms with. And if you don't come to terms with them and you don't approach them somehow, you're going to deal with them in comments and you're going to deal with them after you go live. So you might as well just acknowledge that they're an issue. One of the biggest examples of this is accurate funding goals. That's a really, really, really big, that's a huge one. And it's been an issue of discussion on multiple platforms, all over Reddit, all over everything. You can find plenty of conversations about this, about whether or not publishers are putting an accurate funding goal onto their page. Because in short, for those of you that maybe don't follow the Kickstarter scene very much, if you say it takes X dollars to make your game and then you overfund, but you actually didn't ask for enough money, you have to cancel, even though you succeeded. And that's going to put a tarnish on your name. It's going to make people question your integrity. It's bad. So you don't want to do that. But at the same time, if you don't have your funding goal low, you're not going to hit all those fancy stretch goals and start getting into all of this complete fake hype train, because it's fake. It's not real. You don't actually have enough money to make your game yet, but people think that you do. So you start getting into all these fancy stretch goals, and now the value of your game, perceptively, gets bigger, gets higher. So you have to come to terms with that right up front. You have to go like, okay, am I going to be ethical in my funding goal, or am I going to risk it all, ask for less than I need, and then hope for the best? We took the ethical approach, and both campaigns, come hell or high water, we're going to have enough money to make this game if we fund. And if we don't fund, I'm not going to lose any sleep about it, because I would stress out big time if I asked for $20,000 right now and I funded and I don't make any more money than what we have right now on that. We wouldn't be able to make the game, and I'd be losing sleep. I'd be pulling my hair out. How am I going to come up with the rest of the money that I need? So we chose to be ethical. Others don't, but it pays off. So was it unethical if it paid off? I don't know. So I think that the Kickstarter culture itself has several of these early birds. People like them. They don't like them. What's trending, what's not trending. You have to be on top of all that stuff, because you don't want to be the only guy in the room that didn't get the memo. And you put something on your page and it's like, oh, I didn't know that was unacceptable anymore. So yeah, Kickstarter culture. That's a big one.
Got it. Yeah. So basically just kind of understanding, firstly, the culture itself too, right? Not just like coming out of the blue nowhere and just being like, have a campaign, yay, launch, right? But like actually looking into it and seeing like what's up, what's out there, and making sure that you are educated enough to like, be able to kind of back up what you want to do too, right? Like in the way that you want to run your campaign, right? You're setting a goal that if you meet it, you will be able to fund it. Other people, like you mentioned, are setting it artificially low and, using other, magical tactics in order to try to make it happen. So yeah, like just coming back to understanding Kickstarter. I really love that. I really love that. Because a lot of people, trying to do what you're doing, come into Kickstarter and they just kind of hope and wish that something happens in a way.
Yeah, and the timing on things is everything, because looking at the situation right now with shipping, it's a really good example. Last time that we launched, we had X figures set up for shipping, right? And we're using 3 of the biggest names in the industry for fulfillment. So just by showing those names and knowing that other games of the same weight and the same volume should be the same shipping costs, right, for anyone. But that face value sort of like common sense approach isn't what people really want. Just because if they see those big names, it's not clicking that this is going to be fair. So if you put a high shipping estimate up on the page, no one sees this is a high shipping estimate. They ignore that part and they just see the number and they go, that's too high. Meanwhile, current state of situation with Brexit and the new VAT situations going on, and that there are ships that are completely dropping containers into the ocean and causing all sorts of problems. And like the fact the timing is going to change dramatically now, and you have to adjust to that. And so we're not going to pretend that all these things aren't happening and then give you the shipping rates of 2018 just because they were lower. And then we fund, and then we send you the shipping costs, and then it's like $5 or $6 higher than what you were expecting, simply because it's the same exact thing as the funding goal, right? You want to have an accurate number. You want to make sure that worst case scenario is going to be this high, most likely it's going to be less. And that's an ethical approach, but it doesn't correlate always.
Yeah.
And so yeah, you got to make those decisions as you go.
Yeah, and that, I think you touched on this like topic really, really like well too, like transparency and authenticity in your campaign and in what you do and what you like communicate to backers or potential backers that are considering the campaign even, right? Having them know the whole situation, not just one piece of the puzzle or one piece of the big overarching conversation.
Yes.
Because it takes a lot to put a game to life. And it takes a lot to build a game, create a game, launch a game, deliver a game, you know,
yeah, all of that. All of it, yeah. It's so much more than just the initial design of it, yeah. And I think transparency it should be everything on Kickstarter. And I know that a lot of people say this is, I'm certainly not the only one to say this, that Kickstarter's become a pre-order system and not an investment platform. And rightfully so, to be fair, because that's the way Kickstarter has allowed this to become. That the Kickstarter, the board game world is really its own ecosystem within inside of Kickstarter, right? The fact that it just kind of like the trends evolve and de-evolve all in their own little bubble. And Kickstarter kind of invites that type of discussion. So it's going to bring in 18-year-olds or 15-year-olds, it's going to bring in 40-year-olds, it's going to bring all sorts of demographics, but they're looking at it as a place to buy board games. And when you do that, you forget that it is a crowdfunding platform, which means you're investing in somebody's project, which means you should want to know the X's and the O's. You should want to know how much it actually costs for me to make this game. And I am absolutely 100% ready to send off. And I have already shared to several people, to be completely transparent, the actual bottom line costs. We're going with eStar to make our game. And I know that their quotes are higher than some of the other companies, but we love their track record. I'm a big fan of their components. So we went with them. I've shared those quotes with as many people as ask for them. And when I do this, they realize that we are squeezing in at how much it's going to cost to make this game. And we have their full support because they know that the cost of this game is X. But if you don't know that information and you don't have a desire to learn that information, then you're treating it like a pre-order system, and it can cause a lot of problems. So, but we are where we are. I'm using the Kickstarter, so I can't be a hypocrite. I'm on it, right? So I'm not completely bashing the platform, but the perception of it, it is a little skewed.
Yeah, no, this was a great kind of insight into the mind of a creator, why of picking Kickstarter, how to use Kickstarter, how, you know, all the pricing and the cost of goods, landed goods, and all that, how it all comes together too for a campaign just to come to life, right? Yeah. And with Runelords, there's a lot of pieces. There's not only cards, but you have actual, you know, figures too of being included, and they're pricey. I'm gonna be honest, they're pricey, right, to put into a game, but they look awesome though.
Yeah, and we took the approach of going add-ons, and we did that for a reason. You know, we did over 14 conventions worldwide. It's been to UK, it's been to Germany, Essen-Spiel. We did the gamut, right, for over a year and a half. And I did just under 1,000 surveys, 5-question surveys always. We kind of alternated the questions in there, but we did surveys, all of them, and then we compiled them into a database, and we analyzed that information. And it was overwhelming on the side of, I don't need any more miniatures, let's go standees. So we did that in the first campaign. And then this campaign, we're deciding that we're going to offer them as add-ons, so if you want to purchase it. So it offsets it. But to understand, though, even if only one person buys that add-on, only one person buys it, we owe that person those miniatures, which means we have to get the molds made, and we have to have them cast. And so there's going to be no way around it. Like we're committing to the price of making those minis, whether you buy the add-on or not, because not everybody's going to get them. So we have to work all that cost in, even if the game is only $49 with standees. So
got it.
Things to think about.
Oh yeah, those are, again, really, really good things to kind of, for potential backers to understand too, in the whole ecosystem of Kickstarter. And on kind of a lighter note here, since we're getting towards the end of our interview here, tell us about like what games are your favorites? Like what do you like on Kickstarter, off Kickstarter? What do you play mostly?
So I'm a story-driven guy. I'm not a number crunching guy. If your theme and your artwork and your overall immersive experience can pull me into your world, I'm going to enjoy your game way more. That's just the type of gamer that I am, right? So anything that's Shadowrun or Cthulhu Mythos or high fantasy, these are all the things that are going to pull me in. So my personal favorite games aren't going to be the ones that rate the highest on BGG. Let's just be clear, right? But I love Mansions of Madness. I love how immersive those stories are. I love how diverse the stories are per game mode and per scenario. And if you're looking, when you talk about the fastest kind of like, I just want to play a game real quick, we're drinking some beers and just having some fun, Ink and Gold is my favorite speedy game to play. And yeah, and games coming up that I'm looking forward to. Moonshell looks fantastic. That's coming out soon. The Unfiltered Gamers guys are making this game, and I love the artwork. The artwork is fantastic in the game, and the game itself has some really cool, unique aspects to it. And I feel like I can get my fiance in on the game. I feel like I can get casual players in. So yeah, I'm hoping for the best for that campaign. So that's something I'm looking forward to. Yeah, anything Cthulhu Mythos though, to be clear. You're gonna get my money.
All right, you're basically just DM John if you're working on something like this, because he's just gonna just throw money at you.
We'll put Venmo in public.
Yeah. So and here, like as a game designer too, right? You're probably just looking for games all the time, or like learning about games and seeing what things are coming up on the market. Where do you find out about new games? How do you find out about new games? Where do you look?
I gotta be honest with you. I used to have every single source that I can imagine like feeding to my phone because I wanted to know the latest of what's going on. But lately I've kind of like, I don't know if this happened to me with music too. The more that I was creating music, the deeper I got into making music, and the strive for success within the space limited the amount of music that I actually wanted to listen to. I don't know why that is. I'm not sure what aspect of it is, but I think when this game is successful, right, then that's going to be sort of like when I get back into opening myself up to like a ton of new games and just having a Saturday gaming session, because I don't get to do those anymore, pandemic aside. When I was fortunate enough to land a pub deal with music, I immediately, like the weight of making music kind of went off my shoulders, and I felt a little bit, and I started listening to music again. So I'm kind of stifled a little bit on my on that because of the business part of it. So, but I do have it in me to want to know about games. You're right. So I just backed the ISS Vanguard. I'm looking forward to Oathsworn when it comes out. I got stuff coming.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on to talk to us about Runelords and just about bringing IPs to life, and about how you're learning about Kickstarter and the culture and all these things that you talked about today, John.
Yeah, and thank you so much for the platform you're doing. Like having a place for us to be able to openly discuss the nuts and bolts behind the marketing aspect of games is so important. And I've personally backed projects and communicated with people simply because of your platform. So awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words. And everyone who's watching this or coming to watch the replay of this, Runelords, the board game link of it is in the comment section of this video. So feel free to check that out and back the game.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. Thanks so much for your time, John.
Oh, thank you.
Yep.